Welcome to VMware vSphere 6.7 Optimize Upgrade Troubleshoot. I'm Larry Karnes, and in this sequence of hands-on lab demos, we're going to take a look at virtual hardware and virtual machines. And we're going to start by connecting to host client. Root. So what are we going to do? We're not going to build a virtual machine. This is an advanced course. We're assuming you already know how to build virtual machines using VMware's GUIs. What we're going to do instead is we're going to import a Windows 10 virtual machine that's been made available for us on one of our NFS shares. It's Windows 10. Why? Because it's a modern operating system. It doesn't have the same large resource footprint as Windows Server 2016 or 2019, or even Server 2012, and it's more than adequate for our lab needs. So let's just give us a second for things to log in, and then we'll move on. So here we go. We're logging in now. And waiting for the first screen to refresh. And what we're going to do is we are going to right-click. There's multiple ways that we can actually build a VM. We could right-click on a host, and we can, let's see, what can we do? Create register a VM. We can create register a VM here. It's all the same thing. So what we're going to do is we are going to deploy a virtual machine from OVA format. Okay, so we'll say next. And what it's going to do is ask me to give the virtual machine a name. And our lab environment says call it your first name plus your last initial -W10-A. It's a Windows 10 VM, so we're just going to call it Windows 10A. And then we're going to say next. Whoops. Let's see. Oh, I see. My bad. So what I need to do is I need to browse over to the ISOs file share. And what I need to do is I need to pick the Windows 10 template. So this one. This is a Windows 10 VM that we built for you. Now, why are you not building a VM? Well, because it can take 15 or 20 minutes to set up the virtual hardware, install the OS, install VMware tools and all the other best practices just to get Windows going. And that's just more time than I'd like to devote to it. So we've built one for you. And we've added it to the roster, so we'll say next. And the next thing it says is, where do you want this VM to live? Where does the disk footprint for this VM live? Well, it turns out NFS ISOs and vSphere 6.7 files are read-only data stores, so they're not useful to us. So we'll pick ESXi1 data store 1. And for deployment options, what we want to do is plug this VM into the production port group. We're going to provision as a thin disk, otherwise it would grab all the space the virtual disk for the VM declares and assign it now. And let's see, for power on automatically, we're going to leave that checked, and we're going to say next. And here's the point. It is ready to complete. I can double check everything, make sure I typed it correctly. Okay. And we will click finish. And what happens is you can see down in recent tasks that it starts importing the virtual machine, and you can see that it's going very slowly. Okay. This is going to take some time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the recording, and I'll come back once this is done. It's Larry, and I'm back, and the virtual machine has successfully imported. How do we know? Well, let's go check it out. You'll notice we now have one virtual machine under the Virtual Machines button. So what we're going to do is click that button, and we should see our virtual machine. We can click it in the roster, and then go to the Summary tab and take a look at its details. So let's click it in the roster. And here we are in the Virtual Machine tab, and we can say that it was built for, it's a Windows 10 OS installed, it's built for ESXi 6.0 or newer. And we chose 6.0 specifically so that we could see how to upgrade the virtual hardware in VMware tools later on. We can see it has one CPU core declared, it has 2 gigs of RAM. I could see its host name or its computer name, same thing, and so on. So I can see the general information box, I can see the hardware box, I can see CPU, memory, hard disk, network, video, CD, and other additional hardware. And there are additional boxes. I can see basic performance charts. I can see host resource consumption, or VM resource consumption. It's using about 150 megahertz, 1.2 gigs of RAM. Its consumed and active memory are a little different. Active memory is all the RAM the VM has touched in the last few seconds to few minutes, and consumed is memory that is unique to this VM, that is memory not shared through transparent page sharing, which we turned on earlier. So consumed is always a little bit less than active or granted. So there's our VM. Now we can review the VM settings. We just scroll to the top. We go to Edit. And then from there, we can wait for the pop-up to populate, and we'll see a hardware roster. And then from there we can review these settings, or we can update as we see fit. There we go. So 1 CPU, memory hasn't fully updated yet. It looks like it's 2 gigs. 32 gigs of virtual disk. I can expand any of these right-facing triangles to see the properties. So in this case, I can see that the virtual disk is thin disk. I can see exactly where it lives, which data store, and what path, what subdirectory, what path, and so on. So what I want to do is, the VM was already right-sized, but I want to review and update some options. Specifically, what I want to do is make sure that the boot options are to my requirements. So boot options say, do I present the VM with a BIOS or a UEFI? And I can also set the power on boot delay, and the maximum value you can set is 10,000 milliseconds, which is 10 seconds. If I want, I can force the VM into the BIOS. I can, if the VM fails to boot, I can automatically try a reboot after so many seconds. Okay? So we want to expand the VMware Tools section. So here's VMware Tools. And we expand it. We can see the basic behavior. This means power off. This means power suspend. This means power on. This means push the reset button in the VM. And one of the things that we can do is we can check this that says, hey, on every reboot of the VM, check to make sure that the latest, greatest version of VMware Tools is installed, and if it isn't, install it. We can also ensure that the VM time syncs to the ESXi host, which is a good idea because we actually time sync the ESXi host using NTP in an earlier hands-on lab demo. Since the ESXi host hardware clock is correct, if we time sync to the ESXi hardware clock, our VM's clock will be correct. And those are all the changes that we need to make to our VM. Now what we want to do is we want to do a couple of other things to our VM. We want to enable some settings that you can only enable when the VM is powered off. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Actions, and from Actions we're going to go to Power, and from Power we're going to shut off our VM. This actually, oops, cancel. Let's try that again. Okay. So we're going to open up, actually we're going to open up a console. So we're going to say shutdown, and that will do an orderly shutdown of the VM. And we'll see the thumbnail change when the VM is powered off. And that's one of many ways we can tell that the VM has shut down. It will take a few seconds because it is doing an orderly shutdown for this VM. So it's not just power slamming the VM down. Okay, so I'm going to pause the recording, and when the VM has shut down, I will continue. Okay, our VM is shut down. It's changed to a standard Microsoft Windows logo. And now we can go ahead and make those changes I was referring to. So we're going to go back, and we're going to edit the VM settings. And what we're going to do is we are going to turn on hot plug CPU and hot plug memory. These are settings that allow you to add more CPU resources and more memory resources while the VM is running. So previously, I couldn't edit the amount of memory that I have in a VM. Now I can edit everything because the VM is powered off. But what I want to do is I want to expand CPU. and I want to enable hot plug right there. So just under CPU, CPU hot plug. That says that while the VM is running, it's okay to add more virtual CPU sockets. And I'm going to go to memory, and I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to enable memory hot plug. Okay? And just for grins, I'm going to slow down a little, or scroll down a little further. I'm going to go to video, and instead of the default 2D video frame buffer card, I'm going to enable 3D video graphics. This is so that I can run 3D hardware accelerated applications inside the console of my VM. Okay. So that's it. I can go ahead and save those changes. And that's just made a change to the virtual hardware layer of the VM to support hot plug CPU, hot plug memory, and 3D video. So now what I can do is I can power that VM back on again. And wait for the screen to update. There we go. The console thumbnail will periodically blast an updated version of the VM's console. So what we're going to do is right-click on the thumbnail, and we're going to go to Console, and we are going to launch a remote console. So this uses the VMware Remote Console application, which is one of two ways of doing remote consoles on an ESXi host. Now, if it doesn't work, and it doesn't appear to be working, which is unfortunate, there are a couple things I can do. Let's see. Let's try actions again. Actually, I don't need to do actions. I just need to practice patience. Because the remote console is coming up, it's just being a little slow. Now, not to worry, once the console actually connects to the ESXi host and the VM's console gets proxied through the ESXi host to the remote console application, it will be pretty snappy. Okay? We are going to have to accept the ESXi host self-signed digital certificate. And here we are, the console of our VM. It's a standard Windows 10 VM. Okay? So, this is our standard Windows 10 VM, and we can go ahead and log in. We can log in as administrator. Oops, maybe not yet. It looks like VMware Tools needs to reboot this VM, and that's fine. So what happened was when we created the OVF OVA, we installed an older version of VMware Tools. And when we powered on the VM, if you remember, we set a setting that says on every power on, update VMware Tools if there's an update available. And in our case, there was an update available. So VMware Tools updated. And VMware Tools, because it's a set of kernel level drivers, it requires a reboot for everything to function properly. So we should be able to log in just a few minutes. We'll just let it go. Here we go. So we are going to log in as administrator. The password for the administrator account is esxbiglad.p0m. We use the same password repeatedly, which is not a security best practice, but it does make the labs a whole lot less confusing. And here we go. Now we use Windows 10 in evaluation mode, which means that some functions are not available for us. So for example, we can't play around much with the desktop and so on, because in evaluation mode, those functions are disabled. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop here. We've just imported a Windows 10 VM. And in the next hands-on lab demo, I'm going to show you how to do customizations to this VM so that it conforms with our lab requirements that will make this VM more useful in future labs. But that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.